do we actually need emotion to help us make decisions? You know, if an investor, for example, is completely apathetic, they might not even care to pull the trigger. So help us sort that out.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I wrote an entire book trying to answer this question. So let me pare it down, because even within the behavioral finance community, there's some disagreement about this. Because I think among traders, certain traders who and sort of active management types who would sort of claim the title of being behaviorally minded, they would say, yeah, we can teach you how to harness emotion, and this is sort of another way of knowing. Like, this is another form, this is another way of knowing, and we're going to help you harness intuition and emotion and use it to your benefit. There's other people who would lay claim to sort of the behavioral crown, who would say, the object of investing is to strip it of all emotion. And the truth is, as usual, somewhere in the middle. So
this podcast is for advisor use only and not to be distributed to the public. The Wealth Consulting Group is an SEC-registered investment advisor, and the opinions voiced and contents in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. The economic forecasts set forth in this material may not develop as predicted, and there can be no guarantee that strategies promoted will be successful.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of The Bull of Wall Street. Today we have on Dr. Daniel Crosby and with Orion. I'm going to let Jim do a little bit more of a formal introduction with Dr. Crosby here, and then I'll be back to ask Dr. Crosby or Daniel. How do you like to be called? Dr. Crosby, Daniel, Dan?
I insist on my full title every mention of my name. No, just kidding. Daniel's great. Daniel's great.
All right. Jim, I'm going to let you take it away with a little bit more of a formal intro, and then we'll get this chat going.
Sounds great. So we're super happy to have you here, Daniel. So you and I connected a while back somehow on LinkedIn. I don't remember how. But and then I found out that you went to BYU,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, wow, someone else in the industry went to BYU. This is awesome. I went to BYU, Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
And then you served your mission in the Philippines.
I did.
So later on, maybe you and I can kind of chat about that, and maybe we can speak Tagalog, because I know Jimmy is dying to hear it. But so you are the chief behavioral officer, correct? Did I get that right?
You got it.
For Orion?
Nailed it.
So you've been there for a while. You're with Brinker prior to that. So really, I mean, these podcasts, and you also, by the way, have your own podcast, Standard Deviations.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that you were like on Michael Kitches's top podcast for behavioral finance. So that was really cool to see that. Hopefully one day we'll get on there too.
Yeah.
But our podcasts really are just to get to know you, to learn from you, to be entertained with you and by you, and just kind of want to kick it off that way.
And Daniel, most of the time, these guys, so Jim is our CIO, Jim Warden. Talia Leger, is that right? Leger. He's Canadian, French Canadian, I guess.
He doesn't know.
And he's a chief market strategist, and I'm a financial advisor by trade, but I'm also the CEO of the firm. And we have a lot of financial advisors throughout the country that are affiliated with us. But so behavioral finance is a big deal for us. In fact, we have our annual conference coming up in April in Las Vegas, and we've got one of the industry's legends, for me anyway, Nick Murray, coming to talk. And I remember him talking about behavioral finance literally in the 90s when I was in the business and got in the business. So it's a favorite topic for advisors. We're also a client of Orion's, so you need to give us a little extra love and free time here. I'm just kidding. Anyway,
Give us a
most
discount.
of the time, Tally and Jim have on markets people, and I'm sure this conversation is not going to be too focused on that. So really kind of free forming whatever discussion topics you want to go over. I don't know what else was pre-planned, but tell us about that role of it's a fancy title, an interesting title.
Yeah, it is. It is fancy. So first of all, Nick Murray's great. That he'll be a great speaker for your conference. And I love, my favorite part about Nick Murray, besides the great content that he produces, is the list, is his writer on his email, on his website is so wonderful. He has all these rules about, I won't speak in front of people who are drinking, like I won't speak in front of people who are eating. And I love him for just putting it out there and just knowing what he wants and going after it. So Nick's a legend. So great get for the conference. In terms of my day-to-day, our primary clients are financial advisors and, people in supporting roles like we have on this podcast. And so really, I have two sort of primary responsibilities at Orion. One is I help create technology that helps the end investor make better decisions and helps smooth the work of a financial advisor. So, we've created behaviorally informed risk tolerance questionnaires, behaviorally informed goals-based wealth management systems, assessments for allowing couples to have better conversations about money, because we know that that's the number one cause of disagreement in marriage is fighting about money. And we've even come up with tools for helping people measure their financial wellness. So all of this is a lot of fun to do. Like a lot of the talk about behavioral finance is kind of out there in the ether, and it's not always, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for behavioral finance, but there's not always a lot of practicality around it or sort of what do I do with this? So it's been fun to work with a giant like Orion who can take my ideas and turn them into technology. And then the other piece of what I do, in addition to a lot of sort of PR and sort of outward facing stuff for the firm, is we have something called the Orion Advisor Academy, where we give away free CE. It's free whether you're a client or not. And we train advisors in all sorts of things, but primarily behavioral finance, applied behavioral finance. And it's just sort of our gift to the industry is to say, hey, come learn about how to apply the psychology of money to your practice and get better at serving the people you serve so well.
Well, that's cool. Sounds like, looking at your bio, that you've been doing this for a long time. I mean, what got you interested in behavioral finance?
Yes, so it's hopefully an interesting story. So I went to school to be a shrink. I mean, I went to school to be a therapist, and specifically, I got into it to work with young women with eating disorders. Was kind of the first area of specialty for me. But I found I was 23 when I started my PhD. And so I found very quickly that I was burning out. I was young, I had poor boundaries, I was working with clients who were going through very heavy stuff. Eating disorders are the most lethal form of mental illness, even more than depression and suicide. So it's just like, the people I was working with were just going through really tough life stuff and seeing 40 or 50 folks a week who are having a very, very hard time wears on a young man. And I just I just wasn't in a place to kind of be able to do that at that time. So I went to my dad, who was and is a financial advisor. And I said, hey, Dad, I love human behavior. Like I love studying what people do and why they do it, but I'm not sure that I want to do this professionally in a medical context. Do you have any other ideas of how I could apply this love? And my dad said to me at the time, he said, hey, there's a ton of psychology in the work that I do. And now my dad is a wirehouse advisor in North Alabama, where I grew up. So my dad in 2008 did not know the words behavioral finance or behavioral economics. Like he wasn't pointing me, directly to what would now be my work. But it was just that spark of an idea from my dad got me interested enough that I started to pull on that thread myself. And, I got introduced to the greats, Thaler, Kahneman, those folks. And the opportunity that I saw, even, back 15 years ago or whenever I started, was that there were lots of smart folks in the ivory tower doing important work, people winning Nobel Prizes for their work in behavioral finance. And then there were the advisors over here kind of in the trenches every day, applying behavioral finance, but the two weren't really speaking to each other. There wasn't an intermediary, there wasn't a translator who was speaking both the language of the advisor and the language of the academicians and sort of bridging those two worlds. And so that's what I've tried to do professionally, is to be an intermediary between cutting edge research and folks who are doing the work every day.
If you'd like,
It's incredible. What a story.
I don't know what other, I know you say Orion has an academy, but maybe for the benefit of what you do in your company, can you tell us? I mean, a lot of the people that listen and watch to this podcast are advisors, and so can you tell us about some of the resources you guys make available?
Yeah, so we have all the CE you need to get multiple years of, say, there's a handful of them, but just CFP to keep it easy, to sort of go with the one that I know best. Like, you could get multiple years worth of CFP CEs, including ethics, which is a more recent addition, at no cost. So, I mean, we have probably half the courses are mine, and they're around applied behavioral finance, the psychology of sales, communication, how to talk your clients out of making a bad decision at a stressful time, how to connect with your clients, different facets of risk, stuff from my new book, The Soul of Wealth, and sort of this world of money and meaning. There's lots. So, all the way down to like very sort of nuts and bolts, practical stuff from our CIO and more sort of investment focused stuff. So yeah, this is a lot of stuff there now in the catalog, but folks love it. Thousands of advisors use it every month because CE is expensive and it's not always all that good. And so this is a place where folks can get CE very conveniently and at no cost. So it's a pretty good deal.
Do you have to be a client of Orion's in order to access it?
You do not.
Wow. How do people get onto it? Just go to the Orion website and...
Yeah, if you just Google Orion Advisor Academy, it'll pull up and you can sign up there right from that site.
So I could hog this podcast like I normally try to do and talk to you for hours about behavioral finance with investors stuff and advisors, because we try to coach advisors too at our firm. But before I get into that, let's see if Tally and Jim have other things they want to ask you.
Sure. So Dan, any relation to Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young?
No, and in fact, Neil Young spoke ill of my home state, so a southern man don't need him around anyhow, as Leonard,
Canadian,
as Leonard said.
Well, it's not a serious question. I've been told that we need to be more entertaining, so we're kidders. We're kidders.
You're working on it.
We're trying to be.
You're working on it.
Well, so Dan, we're meeting obviously for the first time live on the air. No, this is not rehearsed. And, you could tell by the other episodes that we've done. But I just wanted to say that I'm a big fan of your field and discipline. So let me set up my first question for you. This probably should have gone at the top of the conversation, but I sent you my market strategy flash on this one. But in the 1890s, the Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov, he conducted some pretty famous behavioral experiments on salivating dogs that make me kind of laugh, but I won't go into the details. But he made a pretty risky move to depart from an established career in the hard sciences to embark on a new career in a field that at the time the scientific community really wasn't sure what to do with or how to classify it because it was so new. And I think they called psychologists alienists, which is actually a really good Netflix series. If you haven't seen it, check it out. But fast forward today, and now we've got luminaries like yourself in the field of psychology, and it's evolved far beyond the study of salivating dogs, and now it's intersected with economics and finance and the study of investors. I guess Jimmy kind of stole my first question, so I'll get into the second one here about conviction. And I want to ask, this is kind of a long-winded question, but I'm going to get to it. Is conviction in investing good or bad? And I ask because, when it comes to expressing an investment thesis, I know a lot of some fundamental investors, myself included, have believed in or believe in having strong conviction. But on the other end of the spectrum, some of the more quantitative investors might say, nah, we should remove emotions from the decision-making process. So which is it? What do you think on that score? Do we actually need emotion to help us make decisions? If an investor, for example, is completely apathetic, they might not even care to pull the trigger. So help us sort that out.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I wrote an entire book trying to answer this question. So let me pare it down, because even within the behavioral finance community, there's some disagreement about this. Because I think among traders, certain traders who and sort of active management types who would sort of claim the title of being behaviorally minded, they would say, yeah, we can teach you how to harness emotion, and this is sort of another way of knowing. Like, this is another form, this is another way of knowing, and we're going to help you harness intuition and emotion and use it to your benefit. There's other people who would lay claim to sort of the behavioral crown, who would say, the object of investing is to strip it of all emotion. And the truth is, as usual, somewhere in the middle. So when it comes to emotion, I studied emotion and investment decision making in my book, The Behavioral Investor, and I cite research in there where they did fMRI studies. So like you hook up someone to a brain scan and you show them different types of stimuli. So they showed them all the good stuff, all the stuff you can't talk about in polite company. So like sex, death, religion, politics, money, all the rude stuff that's the good stuff. And they measured the level of excitement in the brain when people were exposed to these different stimuli. And more than sex, more than death, more than anything else, money showed excitatory power. So thinking about money is enormously excitatory for us, right? I mean, it really gets our emotions cranked up. And anyone who's ever, actively managed their money or had to make a financial decision can attest to this. So the first thing to say is no decision, right, is emotionless, and especially not a financial decision. So the idea that a financial decision can ever be stripped of its emotional valence is just wishful thinking, right? It's just not going to happen.
Right.
And in fact, when Damasio and others have studied, you can study people with traumatic brain injuries who have had the parts of their brains that make that sort of generate emotion damaged, so they're effectively emotionless. They have a hard time making even very simple decisions. So it's like, chocolate or vanilla ice cream, like, I don't know, and you say, black jacket or, navy jacket, I can't decide. Because even sort of seemingly simple decisions have an emotional substrate. So that's the first thing you have to sort of own, is emotion is everywhere, and it's especially present with money. So knowing this, though, there's a few ways that we can think about this. Mostly, investment decision making is better when it's emotionless, but there are certain special cases where you can use emotion to your benefit. For instance, one study out of Canada, your home country there, the 51st state soon to be, found that people who looked at a picture of their children before they made a financial decision were much more likely to save and make better financial decisions.
Wow.
Now, that is irrational. And, a lot of people would say, well, the point of behavioral finance is to make investing rational. I don't care. Like if looking at a picture of your kids is totally irrational, but it helps you make good choices, do it all day. In that case, that's an emotion that led to a positive decision. But then on the flip side, something like go back to the GameStop era, I think a lot of the emotion and the FOMO and the things that surrounded GameStop and AMC led people to some really dark places and some really poor decisions. So it depends greatly on how you are using that emotion. And if you can corral that emotion to help propel you in a positive direction or a negative direction, but it will never be emotionless. So it's only what are you doing with that emotion?
Reminds me of the
That's
Super
great.
Bowl bet that I made yesterday. Wasn't happy about it this morning, guys.
You're not feeling
No,
good about
not
it?
at all.
I don't think anyone saw the Super Bowl being quite as boring as it was.
Especially when I did the other thing 2 years ago, called a whipsaw. Anyway,
So I got a follow-up question, if you don't mind, Tally, to that, because
Go for it.
you mentioned this in your books. I've got your book here, The Soul of Wealth. I haven't read the whole thing. I apologize. I wanted to be a little bit prepared for this. You mentioned in here part of the challenge is that investors sometimes want to feel like they have control over their investments when largely it's the markets. Maybe they have some skill, but sometimes they confuse skill with luck. And you mention in here, you say, to solve the right problem, the first step is to admit you have little control over most external events. That dose of humility then allows your mind to make better, more rational decisions with your money. And then you go on to talk about process, and this is in the chapter, you might be solving the wrong problem. So wanted to just maybe if you could talk a little bit more about that, and in terms of why process really needs to come into play for advisors. I did by the way, I did the CFA curriculum, and I'm the CFA charter holder, and that there are some things that we kind of touch on lightly, these different biases and cognitive errors, and some of them can be corrected, but some of them are really tough. So I'm still trying to learn.
Yeah. So when it comes to control, investors have more power than they think, but in a different place than they think. So when you all probably perhaps have the same experience that I do, when someone finds out that I work in finance, I get questions like, what's the market going to do? What's the president going to do? What's going to happen with the virus? What's going to happen with Google? Whatever. These are all questions about externalities that, first of all, I nor anyone else has any idea what's going to happen, right? Nobody knows what's going to happen. And then even if you could predict what was going to happen, you have to predict the sort of knock-on effects of that. If we go back to the first Trump presidency, almost no one predicted Trump to win, right? So, I mean, you've got to get that prediction right. But then the people who were predicting Trump was going to win and got that right were by and large betting on a crash, that this was going to be this really strange thing, that his sort of, Trump being hard to pin down was going to be hard for the markets. And then, of course, we had a very nice run under Trump, Trump won. So you have to predict the event correctly, and then you have to predict the knock-on follow-on effects. It's very, very hard to do. So when it comes to the control that most people are looking for, which is sort of like crystal ball predictive control of what happens next, Jimmy can't bet on a game to save his life. This is very hard to do, right? Like it's very hard to predict outcomes. But when it comes to the control that matters, we actually have a lot of control. We have control over the engine of our wealth, which is our own talent and our own capacity. The biggest driver of wealth creation is your skill and your education and your hard work. So people have ultimate control over that. You can go back to school, you can start a side hustle, you can, whatever, pick up a new certification. There's lots of things you can do to become wealthier, and you can control that. But that's not what people tend to focus on. People control their behavior. They control their savings rate. They can control, how much the inflows and outflows. So the things that are most predictive of whether or not you reach your financial goals are completely within your control. But it's not the control that most people are looking for. And so we have to help shift that focus.
That's awesome. Talk to us more about your book. Is it intended mostly for advisors or normal consumers and investors? And it's a great cover, by the way. And you've had some great feedback from the whole investment community about your book. So congratulations on that. But tell us about your book and the purpose of it.
Yeah. So the book was written at, my first two books were about really the blocking and tackling of creating good portfolios, allocating assets, and behaving yourself along the way, right? So if you read those two books, you knew kind of what to do with your money. And that's good. Like that's necessary. But what I found was that there were lots of really wealthy people, and all four of us on this call are sort of brought into proximity with people with lots of money just by sort of virtue of the things that we do. But there were lots of wealthy people who were miserable. And, indeed, this is sort of a macro problem. This is the wealthiest the world has ever been. And yet we have this mental health epidemic. We have this epidemic of loneliness and disconnection. And, even when I wrote the book, life expectancy was declining. People were very unhealthy. And, actually, I think Ozempic, I think Ozempic is actually turning the tide on that somewhat. But, at the time, it was the first time that life expectancy had fallen in peacetime in U.S. history. And so we have all this wealth, but not much meaning. And it's this problem that the great psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl talked about. He says, ever more today, people have the means to live, but no meaning to live for. And so that's really what the book is about. Like once you've accumulated this wealth, how can you spend, save, invest, give it away in a manner that is conducive to you living a fulfilling, joyful life and not just sort of more.
When it comes to money, have you read that book, Die with Zero?
Yeah.
What do you think of the concepts in there? Obviously, as financial planners, we don't want people to die with zero. But the idea of exchanging money for experiences and other topics, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. The title is provocative, right? And if you take it literally, it's kind of hard to die exactly with zero, right? It's hard to finesse that just right. But the broader point of the book that people should not be leaving their adult children some hoard of cash while they live like monks in the meantime, I'm very much on board with. That you should be spending your money today to bless your life and the lives of the people you care about. If I look at my own life, if God willing my parents lived to be, sort of an average age, I would be 60 or so when I would get some money from my parents, and I just won't need it. Like what I need is time with them today. Like I need trips with them today. I need memories with them today. And I think a lot of people are in that boat. They don't want a big pile of money. They want to live life.
And it sounds like your book is similar in the concept of understanding that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're pretty different, but they do have that theme in common
Is
for
it
sure.
mostly for advisors, your book?
No, it's really written, of all the books I've written, it's definitely the most accessible. Now, plenty of advisors read it, but plenty of advisors are giving it to their clients like as holiday gifts and as, beginning of the year gifts, which you would not have seen with my previous books, which would have been way over the heads of the average client. But even the way this book is written, it's 50 short essays. And so it's aimed to be really readable and for mom and pop investors to be able to hang with it.
So what do you tell us advisors to do in our communications with our clients and prospects, when it comes to helping them manage their behavior, which they have control over, which can, dramatically affect the outcomes for their portfolios? How should we be better at doing this?
Yeah, well, there's many hours we could discuss, but I'll give you the most important thing and perhaps the most overlooked. Again, when I go to, like, we have a whole 4-hour course on sort of the specifics of this, right? And communicating in ways that build trust and deepen relationships. But when you look at the number one predictor, like absolutely the best predictor of whether clients follow your advice or not, because let me take a step back. We've got like 40% of Americans today receiving advice. Okay, so that number's up quite a bit in just the last 10 or 15 years. So that's great. We're moving the needle there. More and more Americans are receiving advice. But yet we know that only about half of the people who work with an advisor or receive some form of advice follow through on it. And that's consistent with the sort of data you see from like diet and exercise, people who work with a personal trainer. It's like, okay, you have a trainer, but that's 1 day every 2 weeks or 1 day a week. What are you doing the other 6 days a week? Same with medication. Medical noncompliance is one of the leading causes of death in the US. So this is people who are sick, go to the doctor, get a prescription, don't take it, and die. So it's like, it's not enough just to get the help. You have to follow through on it. And so we see that the rate of compliance with an advisor's recommendation is somewhere in the 50% range. So only about half of people who receive some form of financial advice follow through on it as instructed. And the thing that separates the good from the bad there, the 50% of compliance from the 50% non-compliance, is the level of trust and rapport that exists between, the client and the advisor, him or herself. So there's all these tactics and conversational tools, and that's all cool stuff. And like, I teach all that stuff. But when it really comes down to it, it's, do your clients like you? And if your clients like you and they feel cared for by you and they feel connected to you, they're going to be way more likely to follow through with the hard things that you're asking them to do than if it's a more transactional relationship.
How much of that do you think is due to just the complexity of the things we ask people to follow through on? And so, like, one of the things we go to market with is a title as an advisor of personal CFO. The idea of that is, hey, look, the financial planning is table stakes. Good portfolio management is table stakes. Really what makes a difference is who's going to help you get the things done that you actually want to get done. But sometimes are just, even if you want to get them done, Daniel, I think a lot of clients just don't know what to do next unless somebody's really leading them down that path and sometimes doing it for them as much as possible. How much of it do you think is that part?
It's a big part of it. One of the things that I specifically talk about in that longer course, advisors are an optimistic group. And it's interesting, if you think about the advisory industry, depending on which part of the world you're in, the failure rate or the attrition rate is just insane. I mean, it's like 70 or 80% of advisors flame out in the first couple of years. And so the ones that the ones that see it through tend to be very sort of optimistic and can do and hardworking. And they bring that optimism to their clients as well. And so they go, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Client, and they sort of give them the world. They go, hey, here's what we need to do. And they give them these grand plans and these vast dreams. And that can be really overwhelming. And so we talk about stacking a lot in that course. A behavior in motion tends to stay in motion. So get them to do this tiny, tiny thing. And then you compliment them profusely for doing that. And then you give them something that's, 5% harder than 5% harder. But that sort of chunking and stacking and incrementalism is difficult, and it doesn't always happen that way. So a lot of well-intended advisors certainly overwhelm their clients for sure.
Do you think that in terms of influencing the clients to do, what's in their best interest, understanding their communication style? So I think the best advisors actually go an extra step, and they'll learn the communication style and the personalities of the people that they're talking to, and format the communication in a way that's understood best by the client in this example. Do you think that's an effective method for advisors to use to try to get people to follow through?
Yeah, I do, but I'll say, Kitts has had some research a few years ago that has really stuck with me, because it confirmed all of my prior assumptions about the world, so I liked it. But basically what he found is that communication preferences aren't as pronounced as we would like to believe. And that he was looking at generations, right? And there's this thought that older generations want to meet in person, but younger generations, you need to send them a TikTok by a rapper with their financial plan in it, or whatever the case was. And what he found was there were differences, right? There were differences in the level of formality. Certain age groups cared a lot more about, meeting in an office versus a coffee shop, or, certain folks cared that you wear a suit versus, a blazer and no tie or whatever. But a lot of the basics were there across generations, across age groups, across styles. And it was, simple, clear communications, a preference for meeting in person, and just a lot of the basics are just the basics, communicating in an easy to understand style, keeping it personal, avoiding jargon and complexity, and meeting in a way that builds trust is just kind of always going to be good. So I do think again, we can get kind of hung up on something like segmentation, which is this sort of black belt consideration, and we haven't gotten the white and yellow belt stuff right, of just ridding it of jargon and making it simple to understand.
That's great. I've got 4 things written down that I want to ask you. So before this podcast is over, I want to let Tally and Jim jump in.
Yeah, thanks. I got another one here. Dan, you were talking earlier about Trump 1.0, so I wanted to kind of circle back on that one a little bit. So buy the dip, sell the rip. That's the new phrase that's being parroted around Wall Street these days. So my question to you is, how should we and investors be managing our emotions in this kind of unpredictable Trump 2.0 market environment?
Yeah. So the buy the dip, sell the, what was it? Buy the dip, sell the rip. Was that what you said?
Yeah.
So it reminds me of a behavioral bias called the rhyme as reason effect. So if something is alliterative or it rhymes, we tend to think of it as being more factual than if it's harder to understand or it's not quite as catchy. So I think you have to be on guard against stuff like that. If this famously showed up in the OJ case, what was the Johnny Cochran thing? If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit, or whatever his, whatever that combination of the fit and acquit was. And so even these little Wall Street maxims that we sort of take as, that we sort of take for granted or seem true on their face, I think that we have to understand how the mind works, and the very fact that it rhymes, something that simple, can lead us down a bad path. In
Right.
terms of Trump 2.0, you know, I'm big on managing the media diet. So, you know, if we go back to my work with folks with eating disorders, the very first thing that we taught them to do before they got counseling, before they got nutritional counseling, the first thing that we taught these young women to do was to be informed consumers of financial media. Oh, excuse me, informed consumers of like beauty standards with women. And I think that we can do something similar with the financial media.
Got it.
Not with this book, but with my previous book. I was on a large cable financial news program that will remain unnamed, but you could probably look up. And it was they were having me on, and I was wearing like a tweed jacket and, you know, I need glasses, so like tortoise shell glasses, and I had a bow tie on. I mean, I was like the ultimate psychologist in this moment. And the producer, you have the little earpiece in so you can hear the producer, and they're counting you down as they're about to have you go live. And she's counting me down like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And she goes, 2, give me something good here. Don't be a nerd. 1. And then I went on, and it was so incredible to me because, you know, the advice that the producer should have given me was, please be factual and evidence-based and give my listeners something that they can use to become wealthier. But that's not what she said. She said, don't be a nerd, because I look like a nerd. She said, you know, don't be a nerd, make this good, give me something good. And that's what investors need to understand. I think there can be a tendency to be so plugged in, especially when I'm going to try and make this as apolitical as possible. I don't think this is a deeply political thing to say that Trump is always in the news. You know, love him or hate him, he's in the news more than any president in our lifetime, just because he's a reality TV guy. Like he's used to being in the news, and he does things that are newsworthy, for better or for worse. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to manage that media diet, to be thoughtful about what we're taking in, and just understand that the motivations of the people selling the news and the motivations of your financial advisor are not the same, right? Your financial advisor knows you, knows your family, and wants to take you to the promised land, of the financial promised land. You know, the people on the news are to bring this full circle, are going from a if it bleeds, it leads, rhyme is reason type, you know, if it bleeds, it leads type mentality. That's not always best for your wealth.
Thank you.
That is so true, because we hear all the time. I'm a technical guy, so the trend is your friend.
Mhm.
That's one I like. But also, you know, Tally, myself, and Jimmy, we're all occasionally on TV or on the radio, and sometimes the way they want to spin it is like, you got to say something entertaining.
Mhm.
A lot.
Go
I
ahead,
was
Jimmy.
going to say, back in the day, they used to love to have 2 people on the panel that had opposing views, and then that was good for
Full
TV,
bear.
right? But Jim, go ahead.
Yes. Yeah. No. So Daniel, so we are in this business. So Tally is the chief market strategist. I'm the chief investment officer. Jimmy, of course, is our CEO, and we're talking to our advisors and trying to help them, trying to manage the money. I mean, we're not immune to behavioral biases either. And we make forecasts. We try to make them reasonable, you know, and we try to have some sort of a hook with the people that we're talking to get them to listen to what we're saying. But what are the things that you can help the financial professionals, the ones that manage the money or that are talking, like, to make sure that we're not overconfident, but we're confident enough? You know, I mentioned process before. What are the things that we are most susceptible to, and what are the things that we can do to correct those?
Yeah, it's it's interesting. So if you look at people who work with financial professionals have so the clients of financial advisors have a host of positive outcomes. They make more money, they're happier, they're better prepared for an emergency, their marriages are better, they fight less with their spouse. I mean, it's crazy. Like the good that's done by a financial professional is incredible. And there's even a dollars and cents value. People who work with a financial professional do better than those who don't. But when we look at the way that financial professionals manage their own money, they're as bad as anyone.
Huh.
And so it's fascinating because it's like so many things in life. Human nature is so strange. Think back. I don't know where the three of you are on the marriage, dating, whatever spectrum, but I think back to when I was dating, right? I've been married for almost 20 years, so it's been a minute, but it's like, if you think back to when I was dating, if I was with someone I shouldn't have been, that wasn't good for me. I couldn't see that about the person I cared about, but my friends could, and I could do the same for them, right? They were blinded by love, but I could see the red flags. But when it was myself, the tables were turned. And you see that with money too. So there's a real case to be made for financial professionals to work with someone to manage their money.
100%.
Like, I pay someone to manage my money. It's my dad. So I'm lucky.
Yeah.
I'm lucky that I have an advisor in the family, but I pay my dad to manage my money. I've written 4 books on how to manage money. And I pay someone good money to take care of it for me, because I can tell you all the right things to do. But when it comes to my own money, I'm no better than the next person. And I know that about myself. And so I put measures in place to keep from making mistakes. The other thing that I would say, and I think a lot of people don't want to hear this, but the research is the research. From a behavioral perspective, there is nothing to suggest that discretionary investment management should be rules-based investment management. Rules are always the way to go from a behavioral perspective. And so a lot of the way that I invest is by simple rules-based processes that just take the emotion out of it. And a lot of times I don't even know what I own. Just like, I literally let the algo pick it, like set your rules in a smart evidence-based way, and then just let the model rip, let it go. Because better than 90% of the time, simple rules beat even PhD level discretion. This is a thing that no PhDs and CFAs want to hear. But the research is the research on this, I'm afraid.
It's fascinating. I've been a registered principal for a long time, for over 2 decades. And in that role, I've had an opportunity to see the portfolios of all the people affiliated with our firms, including people like Tally and Jim and other advisors and myself. And it's fascinating what you just said, what they do in their own accounts versus and I've always been best off myself when my money's invested exactly like the way the clients are being invested, right? And in so many different ways. I think it'd be great for the people that are listening, even financial advisors that have training on this professionally, in terms of the different things, behavioral finance concepts like confirmation bias, loss aversion, anchoring. Are there any things that you think come to mind now in today's environment that you think would be worthy to talk about?
Yeah, so I wrote a book called The Behavioral Investor, and the big thing that I did in The Behavioral Investor was I took the universe of investor biases. There's like 200 of them at this point, right? So it's a little unwieldy. And I broke them down, I analyzed them, and I said, look, there's really like 4 things that underpin these 200 larger, these smaller biases rather. It's ego, emotion, attention, and conservatism. So ego is the various forms of overconfidence. Emotion, we talked about a good bit earlier, is just what it sounds like. Attention is back to this media diet piece, the tendency to confuse things that are loud with things that are likely. And then conservatism is our tendency to be risk averse, status quo prone, to confuse what
Anchored.
Anchored, to confuse what we know with what's good, home bias, sort of different flavors of that. So those are the big four. In terms of, and that book goes into those in detail. In terms of where we sit today, though, I mean, I think there's there's two things that I'll speak to in particular today. The first is just recency bias. Your brain is like 2 to 3% of your body weight, and it's roughly 25% of your caloric expenditures in a day. So there's an enormous mismatch between how small your brain is and how energy intensive it is. And one of the things that's true of the body is it's always trying to conserve energy. And so one of the ways that we do this is we think less. And so one of the ways that we think less is just assume that whatever's going on recently is the way that things will always be. And they've shown this in really compelling ways. Like the closing argument in a legal trial is more powerful than the weeks and months of testimony that have preceded it. Like that's the whole ballgame. That the whole ballgame is that, think back to your legal dramas you've watched. That closing argument is more impactful than everything that came before, even though everything that came before is more substantive. There's research that shows that what the weather is like outside is deeply predictive of whether or not people confess to believe in climate change. So it's like, people, if it's cold outside and you ask people about global warming, they're like, it's a hoax because it's cold outside. And if it's warm and you ask them, they're like, yeah, for sure, it's true. So it's wild how pulled in we are by recency bias. And you think about the last 2 years in the US, or even the last decade in the US is at, 50% in the last 2 years. People's expectations are crazy right now. People are in a world where they're expecting 25% a year as just kind of the new normal. And any market historian will tell you that that is not the case. So I think that there's a real danger in people being anchored to this new normal of 25% a year, and that the US is the only show in town. I think both of those ideas are dangerous. The other thing that I would say is I don't even know the real name for this, maybe like an affinity bias, a political bias. When you looked at what happened when Trump was elected. So we have data on the 4 years of Biden's presidency and then, Trump so far. And if you look at that, over the 4 years of Biden's presidency, Democrats professed a very low level of worry about inflation. Now, that was a time when inflation was quite steep, but the Democrats did not seem all that worried about it, and Republicans were screaming about it. Okay, Trump gets elected, and the poll completely flips. Right now, Democrats are screaming about eggs cost $10, and Republicans are like, "What inflation?" The inflation has not changed, right? But just the narrative changed. And this isn't, I'm not advocating for one position or another. I'm just showing you how deeply invested people are. Politics has become religion for so much of this country. And we've shown that people really tend to invest alongside their politics. And if their guy is not in favor, they get conservative and then they get hurt. So I think that the two biggest dangers that we face today are this recency bias of expecting eye-popping returns and that the US is the only game in town. Why am I invested in anything outside of the US, which I think is a dangerous idea. And then this other thing that like I should be in or out of the market depending on whether or not the person I voted for is in power is something that you're seeing more and more of, and it's really dangerous.
Do you think that all the cash sitting on the sidelines, like we have record cash still after 2 years of crazy returns, and you talk to some people, and they're like, wow, the economy's finally okay. I can invest now. We're like, what? Where have you been? What do you think that is? And then my second question to that is, I'm personally in a position of coaching advisors, right, for best practices and things. It's amazing to me, Daniel, how many advisors make the problem even worse. And most people are not great investors, right? I love that chart I've seen over the years. I think that ICI provides the data. Here's the average investment return versus the average investor return. And no matter what chart I see, no matter what year, it's always like about 30 to 45% of the return the investor gets of the darn investments are in. And obviously the reason for that is that they're buying high and selling low.
They're
Yeah.
in and out.
But most recently, with all this money sitting in cash, what do you think that was? And then financial advisors, I mean, do you do a lot of coaching for advisors to try to get them to not market time themselves or try to be Warren Buffett's?
Oh, I don't do any one-on-one coaching of advisors around that, but I mean, all my messaging is certainly in that direction. And Jimmy, I liked what you said earlier. I talked to some advisors recently who were talking about how they had basically been jumping all in and all out of the market for the past couple of years based on sort of the political winds and recession predictions, and sort of bemoaning the fact that they had missed out on so much of 2 really good years. And I think the best thing we can do, honestly, is eat our own cooking. Just do what we tell our clients to do. One of the dangers, I think, of being steeped in this industry, being so immersed in this industry, is that we can kind of overcomplicate it. Like, our clients can just go on about their lives. They can go be engineers or kindergarten teachers or whatever they do, and they don't have to worry about financial markets because they've offloaded it to the three of you. We have to kind of watch the cable financial news and keep our finger on the pulse of markets. And I think it can lead us to all the negative outcomes we've talked about today. So I think, your suggestion was a really good one earlier.
Guys, you have anything else for the doc? I've got a couple more, but do you have anything?
Well, I like what you said about rules based, and here's my confirmation bias coming out, because I love to put things in rules. And even though I have the CFA, like I'm more of a quantitative guy, and I'm not one to want to have like a whole bunch of concentration and quote unquote conviction in certain things. But but I guess the challenge for me is like quantifying everything, and maybe it's, just try to systematize every single process. We talk about that a lot internally, but I feel like it's a good move to try to remove some emotion, at least make the process something that would be robust regardless of how you feel.
Yeah, that's the thing, that's the thing about rules, right? What's his name? Gotham. What's that guy's name? Joel Greenblatt of Gotham, right? One of the best audited track records of all time. He did this thing. He's of course of magic formula investing fame, and he releases his magic formula for free. He publishes it for free on his website, and people can just go, get his list of stocks and buy them. But he also has a mutual fund that just invests in the magic formula stocks, but it's has quite high fees. And so what he did was he did a controlled analysis over time of what his mutual fund investors had done versus groups of people who had just taken his list of stocks, which was the same thing. But inevitably, the people who take his list of stocks, they look over this list of 50 stocks and they cherry pick some that they don't like. They go, this one doesn't make sense because of whatever. And they throw out the ones they don't like. Well, if you look at the S&P versus the Greenblatt Mutual Fund versus the people who were working from his list over a 3-year period of his study, the mutual fund did the best. Then the S&P. The thing that did the worst was the people who were working from an outperforming, highly curated list of outperforming stocks, and then discretionarily picking out the ones they didn't like. Because there's always going to be a reason why, something, in his case, he's looking 50% of the formula's value. So in terms of like a value investment, there's always going to be a reason why it's cheap in your mind, or else it wouldn't be cheap. And so again, we see that following the rules is really good. It's a lot of why indexing is so effective. It's not like indexing is optimal or anything like that. It's just rules based. It's not even good rules in a lot of cases. But it's better than it's better than randomly hopping in and out.
Better than no rules.
Yeah, better than no rules, exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
What do you think about AI and how it may change our industry of giving advice? And I'm in a study group of other people that are principals at RIA firms, and we're batting around the idea of real humanoid robots taking our jobs. And again, I would not be surprised if I woke up one day and a company like Amazon purchased a Schwab or a bunch of the large RIAs or a large broker dealer or something. And I'm even toying around the idea of buying a humanoid robot and starting to program it to say this could potentially replace a financial advisor, someone that's trained, with a Harvard finance degree, with the EQ of an Oprah Winfrey, and we'll call you back within 45 seconds. And every major decision will be overseen by a senior human advisor. I mean, do you think AI has a potential to really dramatically affect the way that we do our work today as advisors?
I do, guys. I have a 3 o'clock, so if it's cool, I'm gonna answer this, and then I gotta run. Is that cool? Yeah.
Sure.
So AI is, of course, the hot topic that everyone's concerned about right now. And Jimmy, I love your idea of buying an Android, an advisor Android. But here's what I would say to you, and this is where sort of the alchemy and the magic of advice comes in. Knowing what to do and doing the right thing have almost nothing in common. Okay. And this is where the magic and the alchemy of advice comes in, because you could get this, Harvard level educated Android super advisor who could give your clients the great advice again and again. But if you go back to what I talked about earlier, the number one predictor of them following through is effectively love. It's rapport, it's relationship. And so to the extent that it's hard for people to have a relationship with a chatbot, I just don't see the human advisor really getting replaced. You see this over and over again. Doctors and nurses, this is my favorite example of this. Doctors and nurses smoke at a higher rate than the general population. And if you ask, doctors and nurses why they smoke cigarettes, not a single one of them is misguided about the health impacts of smoking cigarettes. They work long hours, they're stressed out, and a cigarette, helps. And so it's tricky, and I think that's where people get misguided about the future of AI, is thinking that, AI is going to come in and be smarter than us. That's true. It's already true, right? But what I see is that human advisors are going to use AI to do what AI does well, which is crunching and calculating. But that human advisor has still got to be the face of that creating and connecting with that person. So yes, by all means, have the AI creating the portfolios, crunching the numbers, making the plan behind the scenes. But, that warm handshake, the friendly smile, the warm delivery still matters a lot. And it's still ultimately the thing that, for us irrational human beings, it's still the thing that's going to get the job.
What a way to finish. Thank you. Next time we'll have to talk to you about your jam band in Alpharetta, Georgia there with that guitar on the wall. Thank you.
Hers and his three's company too. Come and dance on our floor.